Hello, everyone, and welcome to Capitol Watch for Friday, January 13th, our weekly look at legislative issues. And joining us from our governmental relations offices in Jefferson City is MSBA's Associate Executive Director for Advocacy, Mike Reed. And Mike, this past week, the legislature really got down to some business, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Usually the legislature takes 2 or 3 weeks to start gearing up. They started very quickly having hearings and reporting bills out. So there will be some discussion and some debate within the next week at the General Assembly.
And one of the issues that received some attention this week, Mike, was the school foundation formula. Tell us about that.
Yes, it did. And the formula is going to have a lot of discussion this year. The House Appropriations Education Committee had a meeting on what is the budget, or what is the school formula, how is it fixed, how is it determined, what are the basis, what are the problems, just going over the whole situation. At that hearing, Representative Mike Thompson presented his bill that will be heard next week in the House Education Committee. We call it the Formula Fix Bill. Actually, it isn't a formula fix. It is a way to redistribute the formula when the formula is funded at less than 100% capacity. And that's where we are, and that's where we're going this year. This is out there for a discussion. The big question is what happens between hold harmless and non-hold harmless schools, and do they each take the same amount of money, a reduction? Does one take slightly less, slightly more? What is the situation? And Representative Thompson's bill is out there to start this discussion on how do we distribute the money in the formula when the formula is not fully funded.
Mm-hmm. So, Mike, Representative Thompson's bill contains what's called a proration factor, which doesn't exist in the current formula, does it?
That is correct. It doesn't exist in the current formula, and that is why we're having this problem, because DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, has taken upon themselves to make some sense out of what happens when you don't fully fund the formula. And so it is prorated, and this has some questions on proration. Mm-hmm. Senator Pierce also has a bill out there very similar. His will be heard the next couple of weeks, and these will be the vehicles to try to get some sort of agreement between all of the parties. It's going to be a long process, but we'll work with it to see what's best for kids. And everybody, in the end, that's what they want to do, is how best to distribute the money so students in Missouri can be properly educated.
Another issue that came up this week, Mike, that could affect elementary and secondary education funding in the future is a proposed constitutional amendment that would limit state spending in the future. And we want to share a couple of comments from some legislators on that issue. The first one is from Representative Eric Burleson of Springfield, the sponsor of the measure in the House, and he talks about why he thinks it's a good idea. So let's take a look at that right now.
The studies indicate that those states or governments that have stable tax rates and stable expenditures, regardless of the amount, tend to see more economic growth and more stable growth, because businesses ultimately want stability, and stability that they can plan for.
And on the other side of the issue is Representative Mike McManus of Kansas City, and he explains why he doesn't think it's a good idea.
We are all elected to come here with some certain discretion in order to enact laws that reflect the views and the desires of our constituents. But by enacting something like this, it would actually, I think, take a certain amount of that discretion away, not only from us, but of future legislators.
So, Mike, tell us a little bit about that measure and why we think it may be harmful for education in the future.
Well, this measure limits the amount of money that can be expended by any General Assembly. And the way that the bill came out of the committee, it limits it at the amount of money that was in the coffers in the general revenue in 2008, which is called the high water mark. And it can only grow at 2% over that. And the problem is, we already have a cap on the amount of money that can be brought in. The Hancock Amendment does that. Now we're putting a cap on spending. What you've done is you have said, like Representative McManus says, is that you have stopped individual legislators from doing their job. Part of their job is to create a budget, and to create a budget within the amount of money that we have. And so arbitrarily stopping this can be very harmful. We don't believe that it is best for the students of the state of Missouri. We don't believe that if you're going to properly fund education, that the best way to do it is to cap general revenue. It's a bad measure. It has not worked in the state of Colorado where they tried it, and it just does not seem to be good government.
And as you mentioned, Mike, it has been brought up in some other states, Colorado being one notable example, and is also known as the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, or TABOR, and I guess this is sort of a variation on that, isn't it?
Yes, I think they're calling it Tabor Light. And this does have, if it would pass, it does have a 5-year sunset clause on it. But there's a lot of situations that are out there. This is a constitutional amendment that would have to pass the voters of the state of Missouri. And I think voters need to become very aware that this is, again, a limitation on what can be spent. What you're seeing now in 2012 is that legislators in the future, in 2014, 16, and 18, you are telling them what to do. That is a kind of presumptuous. I would hope that we elect people to come to Jefferson City to make all the proper decisions to represent their constituents and not put handcuffs on them in the future.
Another issue, Mike, that received some attention this week has to do with immigration and children who may be children of people in the United States illegally coming to school, and some requirements that would be put on schools in that area. Tell us about that.
Yes, this bill is Senate Bill 590, and it will be heard on Tuesday afternoon. This is Senator Krause's bill. This bill mandates that schools check the birth certificate of every student who is enrolled, and I believe that has to be checked every year. This puts schools in the place of making sure of the immigration status of students. That's not the proper role for students. Our proper role is to educate students. It doesn't matter whether these students have birth certificates from this state or another state or wherever. We have to educate them anyway. So for us to be compiling this and sending this information off to someone else is not the role of education. The role of education is to properly educate students, and to do this, it takes us outside that. I understand where he's coming from, but I don't think this is the best way, and we should not be put in the middle of this. If there is a problem with illegal immigrants in this country, schools are not the ones who should be put in the middle of this problem.
Another hearing on a bill this week, Mike, was on the Missouri Accountability Portal, and that has some impact on schools, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. We've worked with the sponsor on this. The sponsor wants a lot of the information put on the Accountability Portal, which is operated by the Office of Administration, OA, including at one time this bill had that every school had to put their policy and procedure manual on OA's website. Presently, the law already requires that if you have a website locally. It's a duplication of a lot of services. We're working with the sponsor to try to make this a little bit better for schools. But right now, the way the wording is, we're not happy with the way the wording is and all the duplication of information that has to be done. People keep criticizing us that we're not preparing students sometimes. Well, we're not preparing it because because legislators keep putting extra burdens on administrators and teachers where they should be teaching, and we're moving outside that.
Another big issue, Mike, coming up in the next week will, of course, be the governor's State of the State address on Tuesday evening, and he'll also be releasing his budget recommendations at that time, and that's always a big event during the legislative session, isn't it?
It is a very big event because that's the groundwork and the framework in which the governor says that the state will move in the next year, and now it's up to the General Assembly, the House, and the Senate to take that budget and to tweak it, to add to it, to subtract from it. And the big question is, where are the cuts going to come? We will be short this year. I think everybody knows the projections are that general revenue will not be as high as it has been in the past, and there are no federal funds to supplant this money. So there are going to have to be some hard looks placed upon various programs, and unfortunately, the biggest pot of money is for elementary and secondary education. So we're going to have to work very hard, and our members are going to have to be to work very hard to keep telling their representatives that when you cut education funds from the state, it hurts students, and that's what we're about. We're about teaching students.
All right, Mike, so we'll be watching that very closely next week, and of course be reporting on that during next week's Capitol Watch program, also in the Legislative Voice. And of course, our members can keep up with activities in the General Assembly by reading the daily blog on our website as well. So Mike Reed, thanks a lot for being with us.
Oh, I appreciate it, and I appreciate the support from all of our members.
All right, and this wraps up this edition of Capital Watch. Join us again next Friday for another edition of MSBA's Capital Watch.